everyone, I'm Jen, and I'm Team Betty and Veronica. Quick reminder here at the top that this is an inclusive space, which means that Black Lives Matter. If there's anything that we can do to make our content more inclusive or accessible, please let us know in the comments below, or you can send me an email. Hello from the past. It is still 2020 while I'm filming this, but hopefully you're watching this on the other side from 2021, where things are magically better because we love arbitrary time stamps. Today I'm going to talk about all the books that I own that I read in 2020 and explain which ones I'm going to keep on my shelf and which ones I'm going to pass along. So we're going to start with a triple threat. This is actually the Kingdom Keepers series. So these are the first 3 books in a series by Ridley Pearson, and they are called Kingdom Keepers. They are about kids who get access to Disney after dark, and they are in hologram form. Anyway, they're racist and fatphobic. So I got about 3/4 of the way through the first book and ditched it because I could not handle it. For a little while, it was sort of scratching the Disney itch because with everything being shut down, there's no way that we can go to Disney anytime soon. And also, they're kind of annoying me lately. Annoying is a really mild word for how upset I am with their business practices and with the way that they're treating their authors and their creators in general. But at any rate, it was sort of this innocuous, in my opinion, way of accessing like Disney nostalgia. But as I got further and further into the book, and there were like weird Christian overtones and plenty of like early aughts fat phobia and racism that seemed casual but are actually super aggressive, I decided I could do better and stopped reading it, and then took the other couple of books off the shelf and decided I'm getting rid of all of them because I don't want them in my house. On the flip side of the coin, the first book that I am going to keep is Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda. Obviously, library copy. I picked it up at a library sale for like 25 cents. If you are familiar at all with the author Becky Albertalli, she was under fire for writing this book as a straight woman, and then she came out as some version of queer. I don't remember if she came out as bisexual or pansexual, but at any rate, I really enjoyed the book even before that happened. It's really sweet, very high school-y. I also find that I really enjoy any book that takes place in a theater for any period of time. And like Will Grayson before it, Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda had a great big musical production. So I plan to watch the movie. I haven't done it quite yet, but he's staying on the shelf. All right, surprisingly, there's another queer book that I read this year that I'm not going to keep. This book is Tipping the Velvet. I really enjoyed it. I'm not going to read it again. It's a lesbian historical fiction book by author Sarah Waters, and it's very good and very interesting, and I love a good historical fiction, and a lot of it takes place in a theater as well. But like I said, I'm not going to read this one again. It's really interesting fiction. I may pass it along to a family member, but I don't think it needs to take up space on my shelf particularly. I would highly recommend it. I enjoyed reading it and read it really, really quickly. But yeah, I'm going to pass this one along. So here's one of the joys of having toddlers and treating your books with, let's say, utilitarian care. So I have this little paperback. I read it actually at bedtime to the kids over the course of this past year. And it used to have a cover on it. First, Flo took it out of my hands through the bars of the crib. And then Seb found it kind of on its pile and just went ahead and made it topless. So we're going to keep Frankenstein. I might not read it again. I much prefer Dracula because I'm a giant Dracula nerd, but Frankenstein stays because it doesn't have a cover. The next book I am not getting rid of, but I am passing it along because it was requested. This book is Elton John's autobiography. The cover's upstairs. It's rainbowy and pretty. This is what I read when I stopped reading Kingdom Keepers. I think I was about, I want to say like 20 views in to my Rocketman views. So decided to read Elton John's autobiography and sort of compare and contrast the facts of it all. This is a really interesting book to read. So I expected it to be more salacious, more gossipy, and Elton writes with a really lovely like business perspective, and you can tell that he is absolutely in this for the love of music and the love of creating something and then like tracking it in the charts. He, throughout his whole life, has been a big like numbers guy. So he's always kept track of things the way that people, specifically my grandfather, used to sit next to the radio with like a little notebook and keep track of like baseball games by the numbers. And he does that with his like chart numbers and things like that. And he does that from the time he's a kid, like before he's an artist, he's doing it. There's this really interesting sort of rise and fall also of like maximalism in his life. And he talks really honestly and openly about his addiction and his recovery. And I really enjoyed reading this book, read it really quickly. I really loved this, and I am passing it along to a family member who also really loves Elton John, and I know will treat it with care. The next book I'm keeping, I just finished reading like a couple of days ago, and it is The Things They Carried. If you are in college or have gone to college in the last 20 years, you probably have read the first chapter of this book. The Things They Carried is a Vietnam book. While that's the easy way to explain it, it's a book about storytelling. And I would love to read at least one other of Tim O'Brien's books because he writes with a writer's perspective. Like there's no loss of his identity as a writer throughout this book. It is a memoir, and he does talk about people that he went to war with. He talks about them from a fictional perspective. You know, all the names were changed to protect the innocent and that kind of thing. But there's certainly a lot of truth ringing through this book. And he also talks about how to tell stories and whether or not the truth of the matter even really matters, like how a story becomes true and, you know, like how to tell a story so that people understand what parts of it are important and things like that. So I really loved this. I actually marked a bunch of pages as I went through. And if you don't like dog ears, look away. But like just a lot of pages where I sort of like folded down the corner, or closer to the end, I started like underlining things. I really love this line, "The rain came down in Technicolor." I think I probably will read this again, if not the whole thing, then certainly in pieces. And I will certainly reference back to his thoughts about storytelling and things like that. So I'm going to keep this one. All right, next book I'm getting rid of. 6 Degrees of Separation is a play. It was recommended to me many years ago. I could not tell you a single thing about what happened in this play. I could not name a single character. It is by John Guare. It is a classic of American theater, and yet it did not one single time resonate with me. So bye-bye. All right, let's talk about Midnight Sun for a second. This is Midnight Sun. For those of you unfamiliar, it is the Twilight book that came out this year. It is told from Edward's perspective, and it's a big fatty fat boy. And I love it. I started reading Twilight when I was in college. I had a really crappy year. I had a stalker, and I was not leaving my room very often. So I started reading Twilight. I did not stop for like 3 years. I read Twilight a bunch of times. My paperback copy is not cute. And I have read New Moon like once or twice. And then I read Eclipse and Breaking Dawn a bunch of times after that. Right around that time was when Midnight Sun was still on Stephenie Meyer's website, like the first couple of chapters. And apparently someone leaked the copy that they were reading for her, like beta reading. And she was so upset and distraught about it that she released whatever she had already written on her website. I have literally been obsessed with it since then and have not let go of hope that this book would get released eventually. And listen, 2020 was a trash fire. I would not live through it again for all the money in the world. But this was a beautiful bright spot. It is written so much more dynamically. It makes Bella such a more interesting character because it's not written from her perspective and she's so self-loathing. And Edward's perspective is just so fascinating. He's a serial killer. He's absolutely a serial killer. But he's also a serial killer because he's a monster, a literal monster. And so I think it added a lot of interesting dynamics to the Twilight rhetoric, let's say. And I am fully aware that this series is problematic as hell. As it was coming out, one of the things that drew me to it was knowing that my younger sister, not Lauren, was very into Twilight and that she would be sort of using them as like, oh, this is how romance goes, which obviously not accurate because, spoiler alert, when Jacob like kisses Bella, non-consensually in Eclipse, I think it is, and she punches him in the face. A different sister who remains unnamed and was very young at the time was like, oh, how romantic. Like, he wants to just show her how much he loves her. And I was like, no, we're going to sit down and talk about this. So I'm glad that I did get involved in it when I did, and I'm very aware of all the problematic shit that's in it. And this doesn't make any of it better, but I loved it. All right. From a book that almost made 2020 better to a book that really didn't do anything for me. So The Goldfinch was like my first big, I'm going to take on this sucker book of the year. And I was really hoping to understand what all the hype was about. It is clearly masterfully written in parts, but it goes on for fucking ever. It is so white and privileged and maybe queer baity. If you love The Goldfinch, either the movie or the book, please tell me why, because I don't get it. Like, there are certain moments of beauty in this book. I don't have anything to really add. I thought the book was too long. I thought the movie was too long, even though it was like 90 minutes maybe. I don't remember how long it was. I don't know. Meh, that's my full review. All right. Mexican Gothic, I think, was my favorite book of the year. This is my first book by Silvia Moreno Garcia, and I'm really excited to dive into some of the other books that she has written. This has a lot of body horror in it, and it's about a rotting house, rotting both in the literal and figurative sense, and it is spooky and scary and horrifying and gross in parts, and you should read it if any of that appeals to you or all of it appeals to you. Last book that I'm passing on, Trevor Noah's memoir autobiography, Born a Crime. It is about his life growing up in South Africa. It is so good. I want to say funny because Trevor Noah writes with this wonderful sense of humor, but obviously it's about like apartheid and living in South Africa, and specifically the challenges of growing up in South Africa as a mixed race kid with a single parent. So there's a lot that's not funny about it, but like he just writes about it with this honesty, I guess, and sense of humor, lightness. It is so well written and so lovely, and I have heard that the audiobook, which is narrated by Trevor Noah, is even better. So I will likely download the audiobook version and listen to it again, and then just keep it in audiobook version because I really like it. But I have limited bookshelf space. And so, again, I'll probably pass this on to a family member and not just sort of send it into the ether, but I really liked it and I highly recommend reading it. I'm just going to pass it along and get a different copy. All right, so we're going to talk about comic books for a second. I read 2 trades this year. I read Archie 1941 and I read Ta-Nehisi Coates' Captain America Volume 1. So this is Winter in America. I liked this a lot, and also I collect Captain America books, so this was going to stay on my shelf, probably regardless of whether I liked it or not. I'm going to read more by Ta-Nehisi Coates, and I'm excited for that experience, so we're going to keep that. Little Boy, and then Archie 1941 tells, it's another like war story. This one's obviously World War II, and it's from back when Archie originally came out. So it's a modern retelling of what Archie and the gang's lives probably would have been more realistically like in 1941. I feel like someone dies in this book, or like is teased to have died. I really love it. I love all Archies. I'm not going to complain about more Archie content in different time periods and things like that. Also, this year, Archie Comics did a cool fundraiser during the big push for like Black Lives Matter fundraising, I think for bail bonds maybe, but at any rate, they did a huge fundraiser and then like slashed prices on a lot of their stock. So I bought a whole bunch of Archie this year, and this was in that haul. Next, we are going to talk about tie-in novels. These are all staying on the shelf. The bookcase behind me is entirely filled with Star Wars books, and that is not all the Star Wars books we have in this house. So if it says Star Wars on the cover, it doesn't leave this home once it enters. But even if it had a shot at making it back out the door, Queen's Peril is the prequel to The Queen's Shadow, which I read last year, really enjoyed. Also love Queen's Peril, beautiful cover art, lots of Padme, and really hoping for more from E.K. Johnston. I hope to read some of her non-Star Wars books this coming year, but we'll see how that goes. And then the other Star Wars book I read this year was Poe Dameron Freefall, which I read in the last couple of months. It took me way longer than it needed to because I enjoyed it a lot and kept sort of putting it back on my shelf and being like, you stay there. I'll get back to you, buddy. But even in this short YA book, there's a bunch of dog-eared pages and like things that I think were so funny. I couldn't handle it. Alex Segura, who is the author and also the co-president of Archie Comics, he captures Poe's character so well. It's a very young Poe Dameron, and I think he just nails like a teenage version of an already cocky pilot. Poe Dameron is possibly my favorite Star Wars character of all time, and I have a huge crush on the cover art. Like, are you joking? This is amazing. The other tie-in novel that I absolutely loved this year was Runaway Max. I put a review on my Medium page way early in the year, and I think this might be my pick for like best tie-in novel I've ever read. Like, this does Max so well and is better than her character in Stranger Things. Like, this is what I want all tie-in novels to be. I want them to take a character or a storyline and expand it in a beautiful and like loving way. And that's what this book does for Max. You can read my full review on Medium. Another tie-in novel that I pre-ordered this year was Loki, Where Mischief Lies, which is by Mackenzie Lee, who was another author with a bit of controversy this year. You could like look her up and read all about that. Did she properly apologize for it? I don't really remember, but I really liked this book. I don't remember doing this, but I'll tell you what, I wrote on one of the pages in big letters, "What?" and then just put a giant sticky note there so I wouldn't forget about it, and then forgot about it. Fuck, I forgot about that. That was really good. So, without spoiling the plot of this book, another YA book about a young version of a character we know and love from the movies. And don't call it an origin story because it's not, but like it's kind of an origin story for Loki. If you love Loki, this is a really fun book. It also sort of dabbles in Loki's non-binary nature. Obviously, no one book is going to cover the full non-binary experience, but it does allow Loki this like fluid sexuality and fluid gender identity. And so I do love that about this book. I'm surprised that Marvel was like, yeah, sure, no problem. We're going to put that in canon tied to the Avengers movies. But I'm glad they did, and I would love for them to do it more and maybe recognize Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. every once in a while. Right, speaking of authors who came under fire this year, so I have We Should All Be Feminists, which is Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's TED Talk, essentially, in book form. She came under fire late this year when she sort of sided with J.K. Rowling on the whole, like, trans women aren't really women thing. It is about how feminism is not a dirty word. It is about how gender's made up. It is about how feminism is a more important word than humanism. It is about a lot of things. I'm really glad that I read this. I'm going to keep it on the shelf. I think it's an important text for the study of intersectional feminism. Especially, I don't think we should necessarily ignore what she has to say on the subject. So maybe don't just throw it out because she said some shitty things and agreed with J.K. Rowling. All right, this was another book that I ordered at the beginning of white people educating themselves on anti-racism. This is How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi, and it is so good. It's a really good introductory text to the idea of anti-racism versus just not being a racist, which are two totally different things. I massively marked it up. I'm going to read this one sentence that I underlined and starred. And it says, racism is a marriage of racist policies and racist ideas that produces and normalizes racial inequalities, defining racism from the very beginning and explaining it in multiple ways. So this book is really well written. It is elegantly explaining things without losing the author's voice. There's a person behind this. It wasn't this like abstract concept out in the ether somewhere. It talks about racism and anti-racism from multiple perspectives. So there is some level of repetition in here, which I think is important for an introductory text about a giant concept like anti-racism. Here, I went through a Little Women thing. Realized that this is the Little Women that I was given when I was like 7. This is like a nameplate that I've had since I was a little kid, and I stuck it in there. This only has the first book of Little Women in it. I had no idea that there were 3, technically. So I read Little Women to the kids, the first book apparently. Obviously, this book was written in by my first grade teacher, so I'm not going to get rid of it. I read a middle grade book this year, which was Princess in Black. It is the first in a series. It's a pretty good example of like the busting the princess stereotype. There's just some cool shit going on in here. And I'm going to keep it and let the kids read it when they get old enough to read it. Is this middle grade? I don't know if this is middle grade, young reader, I don't know. But anyway, loved it. Finally, the first YA book I read this year, but the last YA book on my pile, is Uglies by Scott Westerfield. It is being adapted into a Netflix movie, which I did not know until 2 weeks ago. It has been on my shelf forever. I was supposed to read it for a YA class I took in grad school, and I read like most of it. And then I think my appendix burst and didn't finish it. So I wanted to read something that was post-apocalyptic-y without being about disease at the beginning of the pandemic. So that's where Uglies came in. I really liked this book. I might read it again. I want to read the second and third books. I want to read the graphic novel. I'm excited about the Netflix show. Uglies stays on the shelf. This week on Advice Jen Can Dish Out But She Can't Take. If you reread a book that you have read before, it still counts toward your total books read that year, if that even matters to you. It still counts, man. You read it. That should count more. You love this book so much that you're revisiting it. That's everything that I read that I own in 2020. Let me know what you read in this year of insanity. Did you go for post-apocalyptic? Did you read pandemic books? Did you avoid them like the plague? Tell me what you read this year to either comfort you or keep your mind off what was going on or learn more about the world around you. Leave it in the comments below, drop it on my Twitter, send me an email. All that stuff is in the description. As always, if you liked this video, please give us a thumbs up down below and subscribe if you haven't already. In addition, you can hit the bell up there to get notified every time there's new content on this channel. If you want more content, including sneak peek novel scraps and semi-weekly roundups of my full writing schedule, you can become a patron. My Patreon and the rest of my social media pages are linked in the description below. Happy New Year!
Are you always this articulate?
Hercules. My name is Hercules.